if this were to become a greater conflict, and the Polish Prime Minister said that this incident brought them closer to an all-out war than any time since World War II, it would bring in 31 other countries because of this Article 5 agreement, including the United States.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. And Mike, there was a major incident in Qatar. This caused potentially some tensions between President Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What happened?
So the Israelis launched an airstrike into Doha, which is the capital of Qatar, targeting senior Hamas officials who reside there. And so, for those that don't know, Hamas is largely in Gaza, but some of its political leadership is stationed outside of Gaza in Qatar. And so, a big part of Israel's war against Hamas has been in Gaza, but there have been some targeted attacks targeting these officials who are outside of Gaza. And so those attacks have never occurred inside Qatar until this point. And so that's why this week's strike was such a big deal. It was that the Israelis carried out a strike in a foreign country that is an ally of the United States. And so the United States has its largest military base in the Middle East in Qatar. It holds thousands of U.S. forces. And so when this happened, the U.S. forces they were close by. They were within about 30 miles of where the strike occurred. And so we heard from the White House and the president directly that he was unhappy that the Israelis did this. And according to what the White House has said, President Trump was only notified by the U.S. military, not from Israel directly, and that he tried to stop it and it was too late. And so he said, President Trump spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu as well as leaders in Qatar and told the Qatari leaders that this would not happen again. And so it's still unclear exactly who was killed in the strike and exactly the aftermath of it. However, at this point, Hamas has published who they say were killed in the strike. And the notable names on that list are not, and notable names that the Israelis were likely targeting were not included in that list. One of the lead Hamas negotiators is reported to be one of the primary targets of the strike, and he was not reportedly killed in it, but his son was. He was one of a handful of people who were killed in the strike at this point. However, Hamas is not necessarily the most trustworthy source of information, and in the past they have said that certain officials were alive when in fact they had been killed in strikes, and or they only notify months later. So it's not clear at this point who was killed and who wasn't in the strike.
Now, this came against the backdrop of some talks, and while negotiations with Hamas have not necessarily been all that fruitful, there's been some discussion of whether this affects them going forward.
Yeah, so it's unclear exactly where things stand regarding negotiations, considering the Israelis just attacked the Hamas negotiating team. And so at this point, we've heard from President Trump demand that Hamas release the hostages, and he has said that the Israelis have agreed to a deal, and he wants to see Hamas agree to the deal that Israel has agreed to from the Trump administration. However, none of these previous iterations of deals have actually accomplished the long-term goals that both sides can agree on. And so in the past, when they've agreed to ceasefires, they have been temporary deals allowing both sides more time to sort of look at the longer view picture. However, the international mediators have yet to be able to sort of figure out a pathway forward, considering the Israeli government and Hamas are diametrically opposed in what they want in terms of the long-term future of Gaza.
So we've had a frightening development over in Europe this week, a Russian incursion into NATO territory. Walk us through what happened.
So earlier this week, the Polish government reported that there were 19 incursions into their airspace. And so it's believed that these were Russian drones that crossed from Russia into Poland. And then this was such a significant moment that Poland, as well as NATO forces, were readied, put in the sky, and then ultimately engaged with some of these drones. And so it's not clear exactly how many drones were shot down and how many came down for other reasons, and how many there were even at this point. However, it was the first time that NATO forces engaged in shooting down anything over NATO airspace from Russia. So this was a big moment, and now it's not the first time that there has been an incursion into NATO airspace, but this one was significant both because of how many incursions there were, as well as how far into Poland they were. And so we heard from a senior military leader even today that it's his opinion that this was deliberate. Now, he said it's either deliberate or it's incompetence was his message. And so it's unclear exactly what prompted this. However, a lot of experts have said that they view this as Russian President Putin trying to test the NATO alliance and how willing they are to come to the defense of one NATO ally. Now, one of the pillars of NATO is what's called Article 5,
right,
which is one of the founding sort of principles of the alliance, which is an attack on one member should be viewed as an attack on all members. And so if this were to become a greater conflict, and the Polish Prime Minister said that this incident brought them closer to an all-out war than any time since World War II, it would bring in 31 other countries because of this Article 5 agreement, including the United States.
Scary stuff. Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.